So I want to share with you something that happened last week that taught me a lot about equanimity. I was on the phone with my brother just the other day, and we're having a nice conversation. We were catching up, nothing unusual, nothing heated. And then he made a comment, and it wasn't directly political, but it was on the edges. And it was kind of how he was understanding what he saw around him. And before I knew it, I had totally reacted. My voice rose, I cut him off. And basically, I said, you have to see it this way. This is the right way, right? All of a sudden, I felt like I was right and he was wrong. I was triggered in a way that really siblings can trigger us. And I caught myself after a few moments, but yikes, I was totally thrown off balance. And I found it incredibly humbling. I didn't have much equanimity, and I saw and felt that so clearly. And when I look back on it, I think, in a way, this is when we really learn the most. It's in those moments when we're really not equanimous, when we're knocked off balance. And they're so obvious, and they create so many waves. And the waves are in the world outside, but they're also inside us. I could feel it inside. It was a tightening. And it continued to be painful as I thought back on it. I found it really hard to let go of. My mind kept returning, I should have said this, I should have done this. And so in those moments, it's pretty clear to me what not having equanimity feels like. And that feels like a really good starting point. But really, truthfully, I'm not that clear what it's a hard word to say, what equanimity really means as a practice and what it really feels like what it feels like in my body in a deeper kind of knowing way. Everyone says that equanimity is one of the most sublime emotions of practice. It leads to radiance and warmth. It's the ground for wisdom and freedom. So it's, it seems a worthy thing to explore. And last week, David spoke about how equanimity shows up on a lot of the Buddha's lists. But what I want to focus on, what's most important for us, is that it's one of the Brahma Viharas. It's a heart practice. And for me, that's been a little bit of a koan. It's a puzzle that's been a part of my practice recently. How does equanimity relate to my heart? How does it feel in my heart? It implies balance to me, being able to see various perspectives. And what comes to my mind are the scales of justice, right? Where everything's equal and everything's fair. But that feels really intellectual to me. It's much more in my head and not in my heart. Michelle McDonald, who's a Dharma teacher, she sometimes speaks of equanimity having a sense of coolness to it. With metta and compassion and joy, there's a sense of warmth and friendliness and welcome that's fairly easy to access. And there's a moving towards in that. So equanimity is also engaged. There's also connection. But it's not leaning forward in the same way as the other Brahma Viharas. There's a little bit more of a settling back. And it's a settling back so we can see the whole of a situation. And that's the piece that provides the sense of coolness. It's engaged and cool. And so I've worked with that, I've played with that, and it makes some sense to me, but I still can't really feel it. The problem is that it's really easy, at least for me, in the settling back, to actually have my heart detach a bit. Cool, calm, and collected is how I imagine it. And that's a slippery slope. It can get a bit too cool and fall into either a suppression of feelings or an indifference, which is the near enemy of equanimity. So I'm continuing to try to look a little deeper, which is just what the Buddha suggested. Find out for yourself. And this is what I've needed to do, and clearly encourage all of you to do too, to find a way to make equanimity feel really alive for me. Gil Fronsdale, who's another meditation teacher, presents just a slightly different perspective that was really helpful for me. He speaks of equanimity in two ways, and it's based on two Pali words that both translate as equanimity. The first is upekkha, that sense of looking over, seeing the big picture, right? Stepping back just a bit to see all perspectives. That seems like the familiar definition, and it's full of wisdom and discernment. And there's another word, tatra majahata, which also translates as equanimity. And it describes a way of being in the middle of things with a sense of stability. And more than that, a sense of courage and confidence. So let those words just sink in for you for a minute. Stability, courage, and confidence. Stability is rooted, it's steady. It's not leaning in too far and not leaning outward too much either. Not slipping into attachment or slipping out into indifference. It's being figuratively upright. And courage, not in the sense of being bravado in any way, but more a deep strength to stay present and engaged when things are hard or painful. Courage allows us to make the uncomfortable comfortable, which is one of the ways that equanimity is described. And confidence, not a conceited or boastful confidence, but a quiet self-assuredness, an inner calm. That's how I think of it. Dependable. I actually can feel these qualities below the intellect and below my mind, in my body and in my heart. And this has really helped me. It gives me a much better sense of why equanimity is a heart practice. And it also kind of directs me in how I might try to cultivate it. You know it when you meet people who embody these qualities. I can think of one person who I've always admired. I used to work with her, and she always had a natural, quiet self-assuredness. And she had a lot of courage to live her life both kindly and very clearly in the way she wanted to, without being blown around, as if she was resting openly in her life. At one time, she and her partner were sailing across the Atlantic, and I asked her how it was being in a small boat out of sight of land. Talk about being ungrounded. And she said it was really hard for her partner, especially when they had days with no wind. And so she had to be balanced. She had to be steady and confident. And, it didn't surprise me at all that she was able to tap into this sense of equanimity when it was needed. I think in this world, there are some people like my friend who just have this natural inclination. But the wonderful and hopeful thing is that others of us can cultivate equanimity. Just last week, I went to the hospice house where I work. And I was visiting a patient who was not really responsive, in that he was not speaking, but he was clearly uncomfortable. He was agitated. He was moving around a lot. He was struggling with breath that I could hear and see. And I found it really hard to be with. It actually made me nervous and a bit tight. And my first thought was that I wanted to get out of there. Go get a nurse, just do something. And at some point, that might have been the appropriate response. But at this moment, it became clear to me that it was really a way to escape what was uncomfortable for me. So instead, I took a breath. I looked outside and I saw a tree, which I do a lot. And it was a reminder to find stability, to stay, to open my heart and connect however I could. And because I've been thinking about equanimity and this talk, I could feel that for that moment, I was growing this quality. I think we all can grow equanimity. We just have to find our way in, right? Find the way that we can feel it and we can begin to recognize it. So thank you so much